Hi, my name is Gibson. I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and today I'm going to talk about a question I get asked all the time, which is why do people cheat and how can I protect myself from being cheated on? So I want to raise a first initial point. I get this question a lot from people in a ton of different emails I've been receiving, and it's a wonderful question. It's a smart question. Of course, it has a massive impact on relationships, but oftentimes the way I see this question phrased, like how can I protect myself or how can I prevent my partner from, really sort of like demonstrates a fear-based mindset. And relationships are supposed to be this beautiful addition to our life, this extension to our life, not becoming our life, not our whole entire universe. And so when we get into this mindset of like protecting ourselves or avoiding or preventing somebody, it almost like insinuates that we're trying to control this person and their behavior in regards to us. And if you're fearing that you're with somebody who you can't trust, you might want to look at, is the relationship really working, or is this really the person I want to be with, as opposed to how can I sort of manipulate or control or change this person into somebody who I don't think will cheat any longer. So I'm going to answer this question in great detail because it is a question I get quite a bit. And I'm going to go through today and just talk about the root causes for why I find that people cheat in the first place. And then how to sort of mitigate these root causes by having healthy habits in your relationship that prevent the root causes. Sort of a disclaimer is, even if we are really honed in on these root causes and we've got really healthy habits to make sure that our relationship is going really well and is super effective and we're connecting and communicating, we first also have to make sure that the person that we're with is, number one, 100% behind monogamy. They are open to monogamy, because a lot of people will say that they're monogamous, but their behaviors and their patterns in previous relationships are just, they really are out of alignment there. And number two, this video is specifically for people who don't suffer with any type of personality disorder, because often when we see like even cluster B personality disorders, we see like really poor impulse control issues. And if there's poor impulse control, then that sort of puts us into a different category. So this is for all unhealthy attachment styles or healthy attachment styles secure. But this video applies to all of these. These healthy habits will work to make sure that you are connected and you are dramatically decreasing the chances of infidelity occurring in your relationship, either from your own end, if you're watching this and this was a question that you had, or from the end of your partner. So let's get into this. Last thing I'll say really quickly is I am about to close seats for the Emotional Mastery and Attachment course that begins June 22nd. It's an 8-week program. The classes are taught live, and they come with workbooks, materials, everything else that everybody will be getting a send out of this week. And I'm getting all sort of set up to take the course. So if you're interested, please go to www.personaldevelopmentschool.com, check out the Emotional Mastery and Attachment course, and feel free to purchase the ticket, reserve your seat, and it'll be a live course with your questions answered, as well as a whole bunch of workbook and teaching materials. Okay, so let's go into this. So first and foremost, the biggest reasons, and I think sort of everything that gets boiled down to for why people cheat in relationships, are unmet needs and then justification. So if people don't just cheat because their needs are unmet, they cheat because their needs are unmet, and they form a story around this and have maybe enough resentment stored or enough negative interpretations that they justify to themselves that it becomes okay. And this is a really powerful secondary part here. And usually they justify out of resentment itself. So you could almost think of like 3 parts to why people cheat: unmet needs, justification, and built up resentment. Okay, or built up resentment that leads to justification. So here's the first and most important part. Most people do not even know what their needs are in the first place. So this becomes a major barrier. And of course, this makes for like a disaster in a relationship. So let's say, for example, that you need to feel more supported in a relationship. And let's just use like a super typical example. Let's say there's an anxious attachment individual who really needs to feel deep connection, support, validation, need to feel like their partner is engaged quite regularly in the relationship to feel a sense of emotional safety. And let's say they're with a dismissive avoidant who is much more withdrawn, isn't super interested in this, or just isn't super available for this. And they're trying, and they might think that they're doing a fantastic job. But when a dismissive avoidant is showing up and trying to engage and trying to connect, for them it might feel like they're doing a 10 out of 10 job. And for the anxious person with a completely different set of needs, it might feel like their needs are only being met 60% of the way. So this would be a first dynamic for cheating. And here's why. Your brain is like a needs meeting machine. Okay, so it is always trying to get your needs met. This is like the survival-oriented brain. Any need that feels that it's there but isn't being met, your brain will go into all sorts of subconscious strategizing and behaviors in order to get these needs met. So when we get into a space where we can't even like emphasize or articulate our own needs, and then we expect our partners to sort of like read our minds when we ourselves aren't even clear, this becomes a major challenge. So you want to be super clear about what your needs are, number one, if this is you, or you want to be super clear about what your partner's needs are, if this is about your partner and a concern that you have. And you want to make sure that you're checking in. Something I highly advise is to check in on a weekly basis and say, hey, how are your needs being met in the relationship? Are they being met? And I'm going to give you like a few buckets to touch on here. So major needs that I will see that are unmet in a romantic partnership between people that people complain about the most. Number one, consistency, harmony, or safety emotionally in a relationship. This tends to be a huge like a game changer, deal breaker kind of thing. So when there's a lot of volatility in the romantic relationship, usually one partner is sort of causing it or maybe acting on it more, even though it might be a cause between two people. But one person is acting out more, and it usually pushes the other person away. And when there's a deeply unmet need for harmony or peace or stability, I almost always see that people start, over time, this does not happen immediately, looking outside of the relationship for other forms of getting their needs met, just because they're craving like a partnership that is stable and rooted and connected, and so that's a huge unmet need I see. Another one is depth of connection. This is usually when it's an anxious attachment or fearful avoidant individual who has a really high need for deep connection, and sometimes they'll be with a partner who's a little bit more avoidant or a little bit more surface, and from that perspective they'll feel like there's this like ache to get those needs met. And this doesn't mean that everybody cheats when this happens, of course. It just means like these are the sort of precursors that I'll often see. And then it comes down to a lot of other factors. Are you communicating? Are you resentful? Do you have healthy other forms of getting these needs met, like through friendships, for example, so your bucket still feels full, etc. Another really big one I'll see, obviously from like the dismissive avoidant kind of dynamic or avoidant attachment style dynamic, is if a partner feels smothered, it feels like there's a lack of freedom in the relationship. They feel like their identity is taken away, and then they'll kind of start to rebel. So the need for freedom can be unmet, and that can be a painful one as well. When people speak different love languages, it feels like their need for love is unmet. Like if one person has a huge love language around physical touch and the other person just doesn't have a love language around physical touch, the individual with that love language that feels like their love language isn't being seen, heard, understood, met, they'll start to feel and internalize like, oh, I'm unloved, I'm not cared for. And that's really what starts to lead to the justification for cheating. And that's the important next ingredient. Two other major ones I'll see is if a partner feels like they're not being validated, they're not being supported, and also if they feel unseen and unheard in the relationship. That's a huge one. Because over time that sort of creates this deep disconnect. And in my opinion, part of why people fall in love in the first place is because they feel like they are connecting their reality to another individual's reality. It's like they get to share themselves, they get to feel seen and heard and understood by another person. And when that starts to go away, I think the love starts to go away as well. So it's such an important key ingredient. Now, the next piece here is that we start to justify that it's okay. So usually when there's unmet needs for a prolonged period of time, and this will be very dependent on the individual, when there are unmet needs for a prolonged period of time, one person with the unmet needs or both will start to like justify, well, my partner doesn't care anyways, or my partner wouldn't even notice if I, was talking to somebody else or with somebody else, or, my partner's not in this any longer. Or the relationship is dead in the water anyways, or and we'll start to tell ourselves these stories as justifications. And just like as an example, a dismissive avoidant has deactivating strategies, like, oh, I'm too tired to see my partner, and really it's probably their subconscious mind a large portion of the time, just like trying to keep creating space. And the anxious attachment will be like, oh, but they need me, and they'll tell themselves these stories as these sort of like subconscious reasoning pieces to keep connecting and clinging and using excuses. Like their partner says, I need space because I'm not feeling good and I just really need some freedom and space. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're going through a hard time. They really need me. And they'll sort of justify their way around literal or concrete information sometimes. And so here's the really interesting part, which is as this is happening, as this is unfolding, our mind, if you were, this person thinking about infidelity in your relationship or have a concern about it, your mind or the person's mind will make these justifications, these roundabout ways of going, well, it's because this, and this. Oh, it's because of this and this. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, and I'm definitely not judging this. Like, people are going to do what they do, and we don't want to judge ourselves for these things. We want to inquire and understand so we can decide if we want to correct these patterns and behaviors at the root level. But as we make these justifications, as we tell ourselves these stories, it's also this built up period of resentment that goes on. And so, sometimes people are in very difficult situations where they have young children, or, they have to stay in a relationship and they're tremendously unhappy, and everybody's situation is extremely unique and different. But again, I'm just here to educate on the underlying root causes of this because I've had so many people reach out to me for this. So that's what happens. Is we've got unmet needs for very long periods of time. And then over time, because we've got these strongly unmet needs, we then justify and tell stories and have interpretations around these needs. Like, oh, my partner doesn't care. My partner doesn't love me anymore. They wouldn't even notice. They wouldn't even be upset because they care so little. Like, all these sorts of pieces we start to interpret through this like filter of these sort of strategies to bypass and get our needs met, which isn't good or bad. It's just something to be aware of. And from that space, that built up resentment, justification over prolonged periods of time usually ends up with one partner being infidelious. I don't even know if that's a word, with one person cheating in a relationship. And so how do you protect against this? So number one, you want to be really, really clear that you are interested in monogamy at the beginning of a relationship. I know that a lot of people have been married for years and years, and that's one thing. But if you are out of a marriage and you've been divorced, and then you're sort of going through this interesting period in your life, which I see a lot of people after a divorce go through this, if you're going to settle back down, and make sure that you and this person that you're settling down with are both very interested in monogamy and understand the commitment and the principles, and that it really is a commitment to yourself and putting in the work and to the other person. The next thing is to be really clear about your expectations in a relationship. I see so many people that don't ask the right questions prior to committing to a relationship. And by the way, I have up on the website now, it was in a funny place to find before, but I have the 60 questions to ask before you settle down or before you get married. And those are fantastic questions. I've got them on there, and I've got a PDF of a bunch of sort of like tertiary needs, like day-to-day needs that are often things that we really deeply need from our relationship. So I've got those on the Personal Development School website, and you can visit there and check all that stuff out. But we want to ask the right questions and be clear about what our expectations are for connection, for time, for energy, for support, for how we can support each other in our love languages, in our needs, and the things that are important to us as individuals in the relationship. And if we don't have the proper conversations, then it becomes really difficult to have a healthy relationship. So we have to have the proper conversations about expectations, do our due diligence, research ahead of time about each other, and not from like a testing perspective, but just from a perspective of getting to know, getting to understand the other individual, so you can properly build that kind of rapport. And then you want to be really clear about boundaries. I will say, and I don't believe in like controlling people and things like that, but I do believe it's really important to speak your mind. And I see a lot of people not have the conversation about cheating. You know, the people who I see get cheated on the absolute least are the people that say, if I'm cheated on, I'll leave the relationship. And so it's clear that there is a consequence for cheating, and that it will be something that really changes or tarnishes or potentially ends the relationship altogether. Because when we think that, oh, it's not a big deal, or it basically takes away the justification piece to be really clear about your boundaries ahead of time, that cheating is a non-negotiable, it's not acceptable. The moment it happens, the relationship is over, that kind of thing. So I hope that was a lot of information that will help you and answer some of those questions I've been getting. Thank you so much for watching. And if you're getting a lot of value out of these videos, please like them, share them, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to visit www.personaldevelopmentschool.com for all kinds of awesome upcoming online courses I will be offering beginning at the end of August 2019. Thank you for watching.